Hello, this is a new podcast of China in Our World on Sunday, April 19th, with Tom Pauken, author of U.S. vs. China From Trade War to Reciprocal Deal.
Hi, my name is Edward Say. I'm a management and strategy consultant currently in Hong Kong.
Hello, Edward. As we focus on our podcast, we talk a lot about solutions. And in order to have solutions, you're going to have problems. So as we are fully aware of for this week, on Friday, the economic numbers came out. And as we expected, the numbers were not looking so good for China. It is right now, it seems to be the first quarter, there is a contraction at 6.8%. That's very significant. But before I ask you a question, Edward, as we should also know, it was expected. The coronavirus was hit China very hard. They had taken a lot of serious quarantine measures, and Wuhan was under lockdown. So the fact that it only dropped 6.8%, to be honest, I actually think that's not so bad. What are your thoughts, Edward?
Correct. The drop in GDP during the first quarter is to be expected. I think if the numbers were less than 6.8, then people would say, the numbers are fake. And if the numbers are more than 6.8, people will say, wow, the sky is dropping, right? And that's
Yeah,
true.
sure.
Of course, everybody expecting a huge drop in the GDP due to the coronavirus, and 6.8 is a bad number, but so be it. I think China has weathered the storm, so to speak, right now, and the number is the numbers, and China is trying to recover its economy, and I think the important thing is to look forward and to see, how China can recover itself from the economy, and importantly, for the rest of the world to recover as soon as they also get out from the pandemic as well.
Now, do you believe, because I've been predicting to others, and I don't know if you have the same prediction, but I have a feeling Europe's numbers are going to be even worse. What is your opinion, Edward?
In some countries, it looks like the numbers are sort of slowing down, but in some other countries, the numbers are still going up. In particular, in some of the countries that initially they didn't really follow the very strict isolation or the residents at home, that kind of requirements, and the numbers are spreading out, right? So yeah, we would expect, unfortunately, that the numbers are not, in a way, not stopping yet in Europe, and it's unfortunate, but this is where we are.
Sure. Now that we think about it, do you believe that this is the bottom for China? Because as you know, we have people like our good friend Gordon G. Chang, who's saying that it's going to get even worse and that it's going to be a disaster and there's going to be the coming collapse of China because of it. Do you believe we've hit the bottom, or do you think it's possible it might even get worse because China is such an export-driven economy that with the other countries struggling, you'll have it could get even worse for China? What is your opinion, Edward?
It looks like within domestic China, the situation is pretty well under control. Some of the incidences or the new cases were from people who came from outside of China back to China or into China, and those cases are still happening. But in my view, that's not going to be another real explosion. People expected, a second wave or a third wave. I don't think that's going to happen. There's still some cases where, people who came in from other countries like in Russia, came in and they brought along with them the virus. The Chinese, we just have to deal with that. But for now, it looks like the situation is pretty stabilized or stabilizing.
Yeah, and I would agree with you. And I can assure you, I'm here in Beijing, and they still take this coronavirus very seriously. My wife just returned from her rural hometown, and when she came back, the police told her that I was going to be under, and our family is going to be under a 14-day quarantine. So, yeah, I'm here for 14 days, and the police let us know that we better take it seriously. There's no way to get out of it.
Yeah, well, it
yeah.
sounds pretty uncomfortable to to individuals, right, or to families. But in order to arrest a pandemic like this, to really minimize or reduce the risk,
Sure,
it's a hard thing to do, but you have to do it because otherwise you could really have more cases, right? And that's not good.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And I think that's actually the problem. I, as an American, because I'm fully aware of this, is that the Chinese, their ability to adapt to the quarantine, to accept the regulations, and I've lived in China for over 10 years. So I guess, when you lived in China for a long time, when something like this happens, you're more mentally prepared for it. But I'm sure you've probably been, you're paying closely attention to the American news. And right now they started a lot of protests.
That's good.
They're going to the governor's office in all the states, and they're saying, we need our freedom again. Stop the quarantine. Stop the lockdowns. Edward, what do you think about this?
Yeah? I saw that on the news. What's your view as an American, right?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. Well, to be honest, as an American, if I lived in America all my life, never lived in China, I would have been the same as them. Definitely, I would have probably been out there protesting, upset about my lack of freedom.
Truck, right? You would go out and you drive your pickup truck and...
Oh, yeah. And I would be wearing my wonderful Yankee shirt. Going to the pickup, driving my pickup truck, probably bringing my guns and saying, give me my freedom. But you gotta love us Americans. There's something about us that we have this great love and passion for freedom, and so it's not as if that's an evil thing. I'm an American. I know about it, but I think what we have to understand, and I think the Americans, it's going to take time for them to realize that what China has done was remarkable. And that in order for them to have the low numbers and I will say China had low numbers compared to the U.S. and compared to some other European countries. They're just going to have to bite the bullet and realize that the quarantines and lockdowns do work. Right. But it looks like they may not learn it until the second wave comes.
Yeah, that's when it comes to life and death, that's pretty serious. And
well, it's hard. You got to remember, this is an invisible enemy, and I think if anything, Trump is really understanding of that. So Trump is sort of has to play a middle ground. If he's too strong, Trump is a Nazi. Trump is trying to destroy our rights. Trump is trying to ruin us by being too strict. But if he's too soft, then, Trump is trying to get all the Democrats killed or something. They're going to come up with some excuse. So it's a bit of a challenge. And I think a lot of people don't realize, and I've had to think about this recently because I've actually been contacted by people and they're saying, Tom, you've been a little bit too tough on Trump. You got to understand his situation. And I think there is an argument to that. I agree with these people. Because if it was as simple as China, China, President Xi Jinping says, okay, public health, top priority, crack down on the coronavirus. Everyone follows. But you can't do that in America. It just doesn't work that way. It's just the way our system is, our culture is. And what I think what's just going to happen is when more people die, then they'll realize this is something to take more seriously.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think this pandemic also is enlightening people on both sides of Pacific Ocean. Actually, the systems, the culture, the mindset of the peoples are actually quite different, and therefore the solutions that a certain country would have to apply would be by definition very different. Sure. And China have chosen its path, and America, because of the reasons you talk about, have to figure out its own path. And along the way, there's different point of views that it came up, and people are not necessarily fully united. But at the same time, I think America has a lot of resilience. It's a country which has a lot of smart people and great capacity, right? A country with great capacity. So
if anyone can tackle the coronavirus, it's going to be the Americans.
Yeah, so I hope I hope the Americans will come along and try to unite and fight against the virus, and I think the rest of the world will really clap their hands. By the way, Tom, do you mind if I ask you a question?
Sure.
Why are you wearing the New York Yankee?
Well, although I'm from Dallas, Texas, I know you're asking. And when I was a kid, the Texas Rangers were not exactly a great baseball team. And I always, just like Trump says, he loves winners. Many Americans, we love winners. And the Yankees have a great tradition of winning.
Right.
I saw a video about New York City this morning, and they mentioned that the New York Yankees won 42 world championships.
Wow.
Yeah. And the baseball has been in history for a little bit over 100 years. So that's about one World Series win for, less than every 3 years.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So we Americans, we love winners. Even when I was a kid growing up in Texas, I was fascinated by New York City.
Right.
There was a time, even in high school, I actually read the Wall Street Journal every day. My dad, I'm not joking. My dad read the Wall Street Journal in the morning, and I come back from school, and I would read his copy of the Wall Street Journal. I was very fascinated with New York. I thought, this is like the best city. This is the coolest city. This is the city where all the money is, where all the action is. This is where it's all happening when I was a kid.
Right.
So I've always sort of looked up to New York until I would say about recently. I think when I started to realize America's having a lot of problems, I started to noticing a lot of the problems in New York as well. But, and I also visited New York last December, and I had a good trip. I loved it, met some good people, but I did see a lot of problems in New York. So when I heard that the epicenter happened in New York for America, I was not surprised. You have a lot of crowds. It's very dirty. There are a lot of people who, you have a lot of homeless people, a lot of crazy people walking around, and nobody stops them.
Right.
So, it's an easy target for the epicenter. And because of that sort of culture where they love freedom so much, this is the one thing where freedom becomes a problem.
Right.
Yeah. And so what I think, and this is why we're doing these podcasts, and this is why we're talking, and I try to get the word out, is that, I'm an American. I'm the same as my other Americans, and I used to be the same as them. I used to think China, this terrible country, who would ever listen to China? They're communists. They don't care about human rights. But as I lived here, I've discovered that there is another side of the story, and that's why I do what I do. And Edward, I know that's why you do what you do as well.
But what is that? What do you find is different about China since you've been living here for well over 10 years now?
I think it really is that issue of political freedom. That is a major difference. So that when Americans can vote, we take great pride in that. So it's just odd for us to see how somebody can become a leader without an election. Yes, China does have elections, but it's a different election style than China. So I think what Americans need to realize is every culture has its own way of doing things, its own type of governance, and its own type of system. And as long as the country is functioning and many of the people are happy and there is social stability and good economy, then, don't change it. You know, and so when I see China succeeding, people should take notice.
Would you advise the American or the U.S. administration to have more dialogue with the Chinese?
Of course.
Yeah.
I've
So
been doing that for months.
What would be your advice to, let's say, the Trump administration?
Stop blaming China first. You know, you look like you're not taking responsibility for your mistakes. China has taken responsibility for its mistakes by announcing to the World Health Organization, to other countries, that the virus started to get out of control in Wuhan. They put the Wuhan lockdown, and you know, it's like Trump says, "Oh, they didn't give us enough warning." Well, China did a lockdown on Wuhan. There's 11 million people. New York City only has 9 million. Wuhan has more people than New York City.
Yeah.
You
I think
understand?
Americans don't know that, right?
Yeah. So I would advise for the people of Washington, just instead of, you know, it's easy to blame others, and then just do your blaming after the fact. But threatening to demand reparations from China for the virus that was just a natural fact of life. These conspiracy theories you're hearing that it came from a Wuhan lab or a U.S. lab, I don't believe that's true at all. It's just a fact of nature. People get sick. You're right. And I'm sure you're dealing with those issues as well. Edward, tell me, are a lot of people coming up to you, Edward, and saying the Chinese are behind it, that they did this intentionally, that they did this on purpose? Do you hear that a lot as well, Edward?
Yeah, of course. I read the news and saw a lot of this kind of comments, especially from U.S. politicians.
Yeah.
In some cases, European politicians as well, right?
Sure.
There's a lot of acquisitions, but most of the acquisitions are not based on facts.
Yeah.
You know, I really hope that we can stay calm and objective, even though, of course, you know, a lot of people are dying and, you know, are sick, right? But at the same time, let's let science to really find out what really happened, right? Let science check. At some point, I'm sure, at some point, you know, with very smart scientists, medical doctors, and all the specialists, at some point, we're going to find out what really happened. But, you know, as a hypothesis, I would agree with you that, in fact, you know, at least my own view is that this virus has been around humanity for some time, and maybe has already been spreading around. We just didn't know about it, right? Or we didn't pay attention because
and that is very true. And I think the argument, China should have warned countries earlier if it was around. Well, you know, at the beginning, and I've noticed this because I've always been monitoring the news closely for the last 10 years of my life. And there was always stories there was going to be a super flu, and this was going to be the next pandemic that was going to destroy the world. And then about a month later, no one's talking about it.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah.
I know that.
Okay. This could have happened in any country, not just China. It could have happened in Japan. It could have happened even in America. It just is. Yeah.
I think that's the nature of our planet, the ecosystem on our planet. And such as the ecosystem that we're in, human beings cannot, you know, be isolated from the rest of the ecosystem. And
sure.
The nature is really telling us that, hey, you know, you guys have to behave, right? You know.
Yeah.
You guys are not behaving. And you know.
Yeah, and I also think there's this back to nature.
Right.
Idea, and it's Mother Nature had to tell us. Go back to nature. Yeah.
Right, and so let's think of this together. You know, we knew that every country has somewhat of a different system, a different approach, because of a different culture and different mindset and so on. But the issue is the same. It's the pandemic. As we said before, the virus doesn't know national borders. It goes around. And, you know, we need to deal with this together. I hope, you know, as you were saying, that the U.S. would talk to the Chinese. And I also hope as a Chinese, the Chinese will also talk to the Americans.
And I'll have good news for you because I'm here in Beijing.
Yeah,
They want to. They would love to talk to the Americans, but you can't help somebody if they don't want your help.
that's
If
true.
they think you're giving bad advice, then why give somebody advice? The Chinese are aware that there's a lot of Americans who are very angry at them, but if asked for help, they want to help. Most Chinese I know, with of course with a few exceptions, but most of the good Chinese people I know here in Beijing, they said, yeah, we understand they get angry, but this is about saving lives. They still want to help.
Yeah, I think having a healthy dialogue across the major powers, in particular, of course, the U.S. and China, and for the matter, major European countries, having a dialogue and trying to, understand each other and try to help each other. I think the key is to try to arrest this pandemic as quickly as possible, so we can revert back to more normal lives.
Yeah.
Hopefully, we recover our economy to a large extent, let the commerce go again, and we can go back to work. That kind of stuff. Let's hope that will happen as soon as we could.
Yeah, but the trick is, and it's sort of like my concern, and I've even posted comments on this already. Was you hear the Americans, they say, "Oh, we need to go back to business. May 1st, we're going to go back to normal," and
that's a bit.
I don't.
That's
I think that's too soon. Yeah.
Too soon. You got to really be really ready, right?
Yeah, but unfortunately, it's hard to convince them otherwise right now.
Right. So
yeah,
would you being a Dallas man, but
yeah,
you're also wearing a New York
Yankees. Yeah.
So you are both in a way, right? You both Republican.
Yeah, and I can talk to Democrats if they want to talk to me peacefully.
So that's good.
Peacefully, please. Don't yell at me. If you don't want to yell at me, have a good dialogue. I'm open to talking to anyone.
Yeah. But I think you're right. The recent protests that I'm seeing on the news in a number of U.S. states like Michigan and other states.
Yeah.
It's pretty crazy, actually. It shows the emotions from the people. I hope rationality would come back, and people really try to have certain degree of solidarity to fight against the pandemic, because the pandemic is the number one priority.
Yeah, and also you have to realize that I think, and I was also wondering about the economic issue. Why is it that the Chinese can take a hard hit and go, oh, we can recover, no problem? Whereas the Americans and the Europeans, they are not so willing to take the hard hit. I had to really think about this in my mind for some time, and I realized, and it was, like I said, my wife went to her rural hometown. Many Chinese, they have their home in the cities, but they have their distant relatives, their parents or grandparents in the rural hometown. So if something goes terrible, they lose their job, they go bankrupt, they can go back to their family in their rural hometown and start all over. Americans don't have that.
Oh, okay.
You see what I'm getting at? So I think, one, I say we need to focus on solutions, and sometimes, yes, when people approach me and say, Tom, you've been too hard, please understand how we feel. And I have to understand that, because when you want solutions, you have to know what can be fixed and what cannot be fixed. And the Americans, those who lived in cities, they've had their parents living in those cities, their grandparents living in those cities. They don't have a fallback. Yeah. So, Edward, what do you think would be a good solution about this particular issue?
Which issue, sorry?
Which would be about the fact that the Chinese have a fallback. They can go back to their rural hometowns, but the Americans, they're left on their own.
Well, I'm not sure I would have a solution for that.
Yeah, but I mean, any idea just to get the dialogue going?
Yeah, my view on this issue, China versus U.S. is that despite the rhetoric that you are hearing from some of the American politicians, in fact, the trust in China from the common people to the government is actually pretty high.
Yes.
The government has actually delivered. They have delivered that within a couple of months, they were able to put this incredible problem, the pandemic, under control. And they have taken some really hard decisions. And of course, some people also were not entirely happy. But in general, I think the general public was quite grateful that actually the situation can be ratified in such a short period of time, and then life can become, more normal now, right? Or coming back to normality. So I think it has demonstrated that despite perhaps some of the American politicians who have viewed the Chinese system as not a reliable system, that they have a lot of doubts and concerns about the system. And as you said earlier, because there's no election, there's no open elections and so on for the country's leader. And so there's a lot of questions about the system. But in reality, for now, you're seeing actually people are unifying themselves around the government, around the central government, because the central government have demonstrated that they have put people's well-being as a top priority. The life and death as top priority, and they, as you know, the government pay for medical expenses if people get sick, and they mobilize resources from all over. It's not just within Wuhan, but outside of Wuhan. They mobilize even the PLA. They mobilize the SOEs, the state-owned enterprises, and also encourage the private sectors to come and help. And everybody trying to help is like there's a common purpose, right? The common purpose is to fight the pandemic within a certain period of time, and the Chinese system make it happen. I think this is an area that the Americans probably should, at least get out from the ideology sort of for the time being, and really examine what really happened, and really pick out the positives, the good things that the Chinese government have done, and to see if there's any lessons learned. There are areas that Americans can still think that the Chinese approach or practice is not good, it's not worthwhile to copy, and so on. That's okay, that's fine. But be open-minded, right? Get out from the ideological bias and seriously examine what China have done, and try to learn and create a dialogue and be open. And then I'm sure that an open dialogue, a mutual learning will help each other. Will help the Americans, will help the Chinese, will make the world a better place. That's my view.
Yeah, and also I think what Americans need to understand is if they're thinking that, the Chinese have some conspiracy to help the Americans, well, yes, that conspiracy is a strong U.S. economy will help Chinese exports.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. And I think that the Chinese just have to, the Americans have to realize that not everything is a political conspiracy or some dark conspiracy. So, I met some Chinese who are like, why should we help the Americans? They're always criticizing and complaining at us. Let them suffer. Okay, then who are you going to export to? Yeah,
you're right. I think, Thomas, lots of people are talking about the globalization or the or anti-China or whatever. People forget that before the pandemic, people were talking about one world, right? We're living in a world.
And I was never supportive of this globalist one world government, And actually, maybe the coronavirus is going to stop that, and that's a good thing.
Right. So anyway, I think Tom, our overall theme is that let's be open, let's collaborate, let's create a win-win situation, let's fight against our common enemy, which is this
Sure.
little thing called a virus. Not even an organism. This is a little piece of protein that goes around, right? And
Yeah.
find a way to fight against this, clean it out, and create a much better world. And let's do that.
And I also want to point out some positives that I've discovered this morning. As you know, I'm very big on my WeChat groups, and I encourage everyone to keep our members fully informed. And I was pleased to know that somebody sent some very positive videos coming from America. It was about New York City, and it was, I forget the name of the title. I don't know if you saw it yet, but it was something about New York, the comeback city.
Oh,
And,
right, okay. Fantastic.
Loved it. Yeah.
Fantastic. No,
Yeah, it was great.
You know,
But see, the thing is, the Americans should have been having this spirit at the beginning.
You know, I was pretty lucky, but I think I was lucky, and you know, during the days when I was studying, I really learned a great deal. Right? Americans are great. I mean,
Sure.
in particular, the American university system is an
Yeah.
incredible system. You have all sorts of smart people.
Yes.
And the power and the capacity of the university system is uncomparable in the world.
Yes.
No one, including China, can even
Sure.
match, right? Not even close. And
Yeah.
Because of the incredible university system and the postgraduate and so on, you have incredible capacity for innovation, for
Yes.
ingenuity, and you can fight against whatever challenges that will come along your way, right? And
Sure.
in the U.S., I learned so much, and America has given me the opportunity. Even though I'm back to Asia now for almost 30 years, the education and the learnings from America is still very much deeply carved in myself, right? So let's take advantage of that. Let's take advantage that you have an incredible resilient system. Take advantage of that, use that, but then also at the same time, please also work with the Chinese.
Exactly.
The Chinese also out there to help, right? So let's work together.
Yeah. Of course.
Create a solution that will be beneficial for everyone, right? So
exactly.
Actually, there are solutions that could be beneficial for everyone.
Of course, and that's how I'd like for us, and always with all our podcasts, is to talk about that positive and that encouragement about how Edward, he's been well known here in China and in Hong Kong for what he's doing in regards to helping businesses become better. And I, as an American, what I can say is that, when I saw the videos this morning and I saw the positive spirit, and it was just, I had tears in my eyes. It was so powerful for me, because it was like, if Americans can be this way and they can get that spirit of we're going to fight it together, we will overcome. But let me tell you also, like Edward Zaw is talking about, you fight it together, but also let China help you, okay? It's not a sign of weakness to let China help you. It's a sign of strength to let China help you. Exactly.
The thing that I learned the most from when I was in America was that it's about its openness.
Yes.
So, it's frankly lack of discrimination during the days when I was there.
Sure.
A lot of openness. I mean, you can really extend your capabilities. So you explore your potential because the systems allow you to do that. And I think today the spirit or the values is still very much in the Americans. And let's try to survive that, right?
Let's regain that spirit.
Regain that spirit, right?
Yeah.
And work with the rest of the world, including China, and try to advance the humanity in a proper way. I think the virus is what the Mother Nature is telling us, that you guys need to behave, need to reflect upon what you've been doing, and
work together. Work together as well.
Great, Tom.
Yeah, great talking to you. And every week we have great talks, Edward, and we get better and better. And I just sense it right now that I think the Americans, even though they've been fighting, when I saw these videos, it gives me a sense that now they're starting to get a little bit more serious. Now they're ready to get into the game. So don't lose hope. It's always darkest before the dawn, but when the dawn happens, it's gonna be beautiful.
Fantastic. Great.
Exactly.
Great talking
Thank you.
to you, Tom.
Yeah, great. Yeah, it's great talking to you.
Okay. Goodbye.
Okay, sure. Bye-bye. Joy Wei?